Fleeing from Laban. Before this story, we learned how Jacob married Leah and Rachel and had 12 sons and 1 daughter. Leah and Rachel lived in constant feud with one another and spited each other daily. Jacob, in search of a new beginning with his family, left Laban and ventured back to Canaan. However, Jacob tricked Laban into giving him stronger and more sheep. Now we will learn about Jacob leaving, Laban's anger at Jacob, and their treaty, inspired by the book of Genesis. Jacob had amassed a large flock and a great amount of wealth. This caused Laban's sons to be riled up with anger. Jacob had heard rumors that Laban's sons were upset and willing to harm him, so he rushed immediately to his wives. He found them in the fields and said, "I have fallen from the favor of your father. I have worked tirelessly for him, and he has cheated me far too many times." With desperation in his voice, Jacob continued by saying, "God will not allow him to harm me, but we must go quick and flee to the land of my father." Leah and Rachel agreed. "Is there anything left for us in our father's house? We are strangers in his land, and we are yours. Everything he earned from you has been spent. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Whatever God says, let us do it." So Jacob arose and set his sons and wives on camels. He packed all he had earned and acquired from Paddan Aram, without notifying Laban. Jacob had entered the land, a boy, desperate to build a life worth blessing. He left a man with a family larger than his father or grandfather could have ever dreamed of. He set his sights on Canaan, determined to lay hold of the blessing promised to him. Yet Jacob's neglect of his wives would not go without consequence. Rachel, as they were packing up to leave, stole idols from Laban's home. 3 days had passed, and Laban was notified that Jacob had fled. Laban was beside himself. He gathered a small army of kinsmen and pursued Jacob for 7 days. Closely they tailed Jacob through the hill country of Gilead. With the full intent of killing Jacob and taking back his daughters, God met Laban in a dream. "Be careful. Do not say a word to Jacob, neither good or bad," God warned. That morning, before the sun had broken above the horizon, Laban and his men descended upon Jacob on horseback. They surrounded him, fury emanating from their faces. Laban, livid and weary, roared at Jacob. "What have you done? You have tricked me again and taken my daughters like captives." Laban was speaking as a father, not as a landowner. His worry for his daughters caused a deep rage to boil up in him. "You robbed me of a chance to kiss my daughters and grandchildren farewell. I would have sent you off well, with revelry, but instead you fled like criminals." Laban's face seemed to shift from anger to sorrow. Eyes beginning to fog up with tears, Laban pointed at Jacob. "You are foolish, Jacob, and it is in my power to kill you and take back my daughters. But the God of your father warned me not to harm you." Laban's face fell. "I understand you wanted to go back to the land of your father, but why would you steal my gods as well?" Jacob, disarmed and dismayed, answered Laban and said, "I left out of fear. I could not bear the thought of you taking your daughters from me by force. But as for your gods, I promise you I do not have them. If anyone here in my camp has them, they shall not live. Go and see for yourself. Whatever is yours, take back." For Jacob was unaware of Rachel's thievery. So Laban searched Jacob's tent, and then ventured into Leah's tent. He tore apart everything, searching desperately for his idols. Finally, he entered Rachel's tent. He looked at her, then began to ransack the room. Rachel remained still, for she sat on a camel's saddle which held the idols in them. "Forgive me for not getting up," Rachel said in her most dainty voice. "It is my time of the month, and I cannot bear to stand." Laban continued his search in vain, then left the tent. Jacob watched Laban exit his wife's tent. For years Jacob served under Laban. For years he had watched Laban do business in the shadows. For years he had taken the abuse and ridicule. He worked vigorously for Laban. Jacob once feared him as a child does his abusive father. Yet watching Laban scare his family and ransack the living space of his wives awoke a deep outrage within him. Jacob became indignant. Outraged, he berated Laban, saying, "What is my offense? What have I done as a sin against you? You have pursued me like a criminal, and now you have felt through all my goods. Have you found your petty idols? Have you?" Jacob's fumes grew higher, and his voice trembled with anger. "For 20 years I have served you. Your sheep and goats never once miscarried under my care. I have not eaten of your flocks. Whatever was eaten by wild beasts I paid for myself. You showed me no grace. Day by day the heat consumed me, and in the cold of night I worked. I lost sleep, and I lost 20 years of my life under you." Laban's face grew white as Jacob bled his heart's anguish before him. Jacob's voice grew softer, yet it inspired more fear from all those listening. He said, "I served 7 years for Rachel, and you deceived me and gave me Leah. Yet I stayed and worked 7 more. For 6 years I worked for your flocks, and in those years you changed my wage 10 times. Jacob pointed to Laban and rebuked him, saying, "I serve the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac. If he was not on my side, you would have sent me my way empty-handed. He knows my affliction and your oppression. That is why he warned you last night." Laban composed himself. He spoke again as Jacob's equal. "Those are my daughters, and those are my grandchildren. Your flocks are my flocks, and all that you see before you is mine." A sigh emanated from Laban's lungs. He looked behind Jacob, seeing his grandchildren listen from afar. "But what can I do now for them?" he said. "Come now. Let us make a final agreement, a covenant that cannot be broken." So Laban and Jacob gathered stones to set as a monument to their agreement. Laban spoke loud and saying, "Let this be a witness between us today, that we will remain separated and forge our own paths, as long as you agree to deal kindly with my daughters and take no more wives for yourself." So Jacob agreed. The two ate dinner together, and early in the morning Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren and went back to his land. Jacob, accustomed to being a trickster with his words, was forced to face Laban as an honest man, and Jacob, who once stood idly as his wives destroyed one another, promised to love them the way they were meant to be loved. And God, remaining faithful to his chosen, was working even in the dysfunction and imperfection.